I'm Anthony Kuhn. I'm a national security attorney and a military law attorney. I'm a managing partner here at the firm. I'm the chair of our firm's military law practice group and national security practice group. I'm also a veteran of 28 years in the Army and Army Reserve, so I held a clearance for most of that time. So I've got a pretty significant background when it comes to security clearance and national security. So this is just our disclaimer. Nothing I'm going to talk through here today is legal advice. I hope you don't take it that way. And these are just my views that I'm expressing. So I just want to make that clear. If you do have any questions or want legal advice, feel free to reach out to us or another attorney. We'll be happy to help you out. All right, Taylor, one more slide, please. Okay, so the topics of discussion today, just briefly, we're going to go over an overview of Guidelines B and C, and at the same time, we'll discuss the government's concerns related to each. Then we'll talk through some potential mitigation, and we'll talk through just briefly self-reporting, and then I'll tell you guys about at least one recent case that I had, which is searchable on the internet. I won't talk about anything that's confidential, but it's all public record. So the information I'll share with you, you can actually Google this case and read the case on your own if you'd like to. I included the case number there. All right, next slide, Taylor, please. Okay, so why are we doing B and C together? So all of the other, there's 13 adjudicative guidelines. All of the other guidelines will have their own individual webinar, but we're doing B and C together because they're so similar. And I think it's better to do them together so that I can explain each and explain the difference between the two. And then also, you know, I'm the one that's doing it here for the firm because I've got quite a bit of background dealing with these issues and actually have that case that I showed you is a really good case if you're looking for a case to cite to. I won it in litigation and then department counsel appealed and I won it again on appeal. So that is a very good case to cite to if you're dealing with the B and C issue. So. Let's talk about the differences. Well, let's talk about the overview for each. So think of it as one concern is with dealing with any type of influence that comes from another country directed at an individual who has a security clearance, as opposed to foreign preference, which talks about the individual himself kind of outgoing instead of incoming, and it looks at that individual, cleared individual's preference for another country over the United States. So B deals with pressures and the potential for inducement, manipulation, coercion coming from another country. And C deals with that cleared individual's preference. In other words, outgoing. Do they prefer another country or do they have indicators to show that they prefer another country over the United States? And the indicators are key there because that's what the adjudicators will look for. So when we're looking at some of the concerns that the government might have, I hope you can all see the slide here, but I'll actually read through them because there's quite a bit of information here. I condensed this information directly out of the adjudicative guidelines. You can Google them and get this information in more detail, but I condensed them, the bullet points that are listed under the actual adjudicative guidelines, which can be found in SEAD 4, SEAD 4. I condensed them here. So the first one we'll talk about is foreign contacts. So everybody who's completed an SF-86 has to answer the question about foreign contacts. Do you have close or continuing contact with someone with whom you're bound in some way? And it's a two-part question. A lot of people just think they have to list a person that they know in another country. That's not the case. So you have to be able to answer yes to close or continuing contact and some type of bond. If you can answer yes to that question, then that's a foreign contact that you would always list. Whether it's a family member, a government official, a group that you're associated with or that you have close or continuing contact with, a business, you have to list it all. For certain agencies, intelligence agencies, you have to list every contact. So they could be a Facebook contact and you don't really have close or continuing contact with them. There's at least one agency that you're all thinking of when I say intelligence agency. That's the one that requires that you list all of your foreign contacts. So for them, it's not a two-part question, but for everyone else, it's close or continuing contact with someone with whom you have a bond or you're bound to in some way. They'll look at whether there's counterintelligence information, any counterintelligence information that exists that shows that maybe you or someone that you deal with creates a heightened risk for that inducement, manipulation, pressure, or coercion. The government's going to want to look at whether you cohabitate with a person, and this is where some people get confused. That person can be a citizen of the United States, but they're looking at whether that person creates a heightened risk. So if they're a citizen of the United States, but they have closer continuing ties with people in Iran, people in Russia, some of the countries that are obviously high on the watch list. That relationship, that cohabitation with that individual, regardless of whether they're a U.S. citizen, could create a heightened risk and could be a problem for you. So obviously they're going to want to know if you cohabitate with an individual who's not a citizen of the United States. But if you read the adjudicative guidelines, you'll see that it doesn't really matter whether they're a citizen or not. The government's going to look at whether you have substantial foreign businesses, financial or property interests in another country, and you'll see this sometimes people will be in charge of, they'll sit on a board, or they'll have an ownership stake in some type of foreign business. They'll have bank accounts in another country. They'll own a house. They'll own vacation property. They'll own rental properties. Again, it might just be bank accounts. That's a fairly common one that we see. But all of those different things are going to be an issue for a security clearance holder. And we'll talk about ways to mitigate some of those issues. But if you're trying to get a security clearance and you own a bunch of property in another country, especially one that's going to create a heightened risk, or you have bank accounts in another country, you should consider closing those if it's not too much of a burden. Move your money to the United States. It'll show that you're more heavily invested in the United States. Then lastly, for Guideline B, foreign travel and conduct that might make a person more susceptible to that inducement, manipulation, pressure, or coercion. So are you dealing with a foreign government? That's one that they look at a lot, such that you create a heightened risk. Some of the things that you'll talk about, or that you'll look at, are, I talked about bank accounts here, property, the investment issue is going to come up. If you do have investments in foreign countries, how heavily invested are you in that foreign country when you look at the United States? So if you have houses in the United States and you have property in another country, but it's not nearly as much as the value or the worth of your property in the United States, then it looks like you're showing preference for the United States, which is Guideline C, but it also shows like it looks like there's less of a potential for influence related to that property. So it's okay in most cases to own property in another country as long as you can demonstrate that you're more heavily invested in the United States than that other country. And again, it depends on what other country we're talking about as well. So moving on to the concerns for Guideline C. So this is foreign preference. And you see I put in parentheses there for another country. So hopefully that helps everyone understand the difference between the two. Foreign preference for another country over the United States. And what the government's going to look at, this is where dual citizenship comes in. You'll hear it a lot. Or if anybody here has dual citizenship or foreign travel documents, then you've dealt with this issue. But dual citizenship counts, especially if you apply for dual citizenship or take some type of action to acquire dual citizenship after being a U.S. citizen. It looks like you are kind of changing and showing preference for another country over the United States because you're already a United States citizen. So if you're a United States citizen and you hold a security clearance, or you're a United States citizen and you hope to get a security clearance, you should avoid trying to get dual citizenship in another country. It's going to make it more difficult for you. If you are a dual citizen in another country, we'll talk about some forms of mitigation here in a minute, but you guys are probably familiar with the process of renouncing your citizenship, or at least expressing an interest to renounce your citizenship. All right, the foreign passport will come up a lot under Guideline C. Don't use a foreign passport to travel to the United States. That's the big one. You see I got it highlighted there. The issue is when you use a foreign passport to travel into the United States. That's going to be a problem. Try not to participate in foreign activities like employment, voting, political positions, things of that nature, positions in the government. You want to avoid that if you hope to get a security clearance in the United States. And then finally, any act of expatriation, like expressing an interest or declaring an intent to renounce your U.S. citizenship. That's going to be a problem. All right, Taylor, if you want to jump to the next slide. So just a couple forms of mitigation. I touched on some of them briefly already, but for Guideline B, that's the foreign influence coming from another country. You want to show that the relationships that you have with those foreign contacts aren't risky. There's no conflict of interest. There's no reason for the United States to be concerned. You want to show that there's no conflict of interest that is being formed based on your loyalty to the United States. You want to show that you're more loyal, that you have a long-standing relationship with the United States, such that you would resolve any conflicts of interest in favor of the United States over another country. And we talked about the investment issue, that there's not much monetary value in whatever investments you have in those other countries when compared to the United States. But if it's a bank account, I recommend closing it, at least condensing it, because it seems like every time I deal with this issue with someone applying for a clearance, they have 3 or 4 foreign bank accounts. There's no reason for that. If you need to have a bank account, have a bank account. If you don't need to have that bank account, don't have it, and move as much of that money to the United States as you can. You want to talk about your contacts, that it's not close or continuing, and just that the communication with those contacts is casual or infrequent. That would be helpful. You want to talk about the contacts and businesses, or the contacts and businesses that you've been dealing with, that you have regularly been in communication with, that contact or the whatever business you're conducting is approved by the United States government. So sometimes it happens for military individuals or individuals who work for different agencies or within the government. We have to deal with individuals in other countries. We have to deal with foreign governments. If that is approved by the United States, then say so, and hopefully it'll help you mitigate any Guideline B concerns. And then finally, we'll talk about this in a minute here, but you want to make sure that you're complying with any reporting requirements. For Guideline C, foreign preference for another country over the United States, you want to show that your dual citizenship does not conflict with any national security interests. You know, I'm a dual citizen with Canada. It's not a big deal. It's one of our closest allies. They're right across the bridge. You know, that's obviously going to be less of a problem than if you're a dual citizen with Iran or Russia or something like that. Foreign citizenship based on parental citizenship or foreign birth is going to be a mitigating factor because you didn't go out and proactively pursue that citizenship. You might still want to express an interest or at least express a willingness to renounce that citizenship. That might be helpful depending on what you're applying for. That is another form of mitigation. If you voted or you held employment or a government position or something like that in another country, you want to show that that predated your U.S. citizenship. That would be helpful to mitigate the government's concerns. And you want to show that any entitlements that you have don't create a national security concern, like healthcare. You might be a citizen of a country that has free healthcare. That doesn't really create a national security concern. I'll talk about one in a minute, but my client had a pension from a foreign government. That doesn't necessarily create a national security concern either. It's just a pension. So they're getting a monthly paycheck. The money's coming to the United States. He's spending his money in the United States. Foreign preference involving the country with low national security risk. I mentioned that already. You know, Canada, the UK. There's other countries where we have good relationships where you don't really have to worry as much. They don't create that heightened risk. And then finally, I touched on this already, but you want to make sure that you have agency approval or approval from the agency head designee. Next slide, Taylor. All right, so that was the bulk of the information. So when we're dealing with self-reports, we always run a report in writing, and for a couple of reasons. We want to report things like foreign travel. Make sure that you know your agency's policies for that. Most agencies, if you're doing a day trip to Canada, for example, you don't have to get pre-approval. You can go to Canada, you can come back, you just have a strict timeline for when you have to report that day trip. It's very easy to get to Canada. It's 15 minutes from my house and I drive over a bridge. But you just have to make sure that you report that to your security office within the timeline laid out by your agency. And again, check out C3 because there's information in C3 on reporting requirements as well. You want to report cohabitants. So I get the question all the time, hey, my girlfriend lives with me and she is an illegal. She doesn't have citizenship. Or my girlfriend wants to move in with me. We want to get married. She's not a U.S. citizen. All of those scenarios are going to be a problem for a couple of reasons. You know, number one, you don't know what the policy is at the time or where it's going to go. If you report that information, are you getting that individual in trouble? Is someone going to come knocking on your door? But you know, as far as your security clearance is concerned, you need to worry about that because that is a foreign contact. That is you know, somebody that could potentially create a heightened risk for you that might result in you not being able to get your security clearance. Especially if you're applying for an agency like ICE or Customs or something like that. We see it all the time. Where an individual is a customs agent and has someone who's not a U.S. citizen move in and cohabitate with them. You have to make sure that you report that as soon as possible if you intend to report it. You shouldn't do it, but if someone moves in with you, you do have a duty to report it. All right, and we talked about foreign contacts a little bit. But why do we report in writing? So you always report in writing for two reasons. First of all, it helps you control the narrative. If I call somebody and I say, hey, I smoked marijuana this weekend for the first time, they're going to be left with their perception of that telephone conversation, and that's what's going to get relayed when they forward that information. Tony called me. He said he got high this weekend. He smoked a bunch of weed. He's probably been doing it for a year. You know, you don't know what information is going to get relayed, and you didn't control the narrative. If you write a well-written self-report, you can provide exactly the information that you want to provide, and you can build in the mitigation. We just discussed a couple of forms of it for B and C. You can build in mitigation into your self-report. We write an actual legal brief, and we submit that through the proper channels as a self-report, because you control the narrative and you actually provide the mitigation, and hopefully you can do it in a way that you won't get a statement of reasons, you won't get your security clearance suspended or revoked. And then second, because we want to create a record of the self-report. Down the line, you're going to come up for a periodic reinvestigation, or maybe you trip CE and someone comes to you and asks you what happened. You can say, oh, I self-reported this. Here's proof. If you do it over the phone and that individual either fails to properly report it or doesn't report it at all, then you could potentially get your clearance revoked for that. You're going to get a Guideline B or C, and then a Guideline E, which is a personal conduct violation for intentionally omitting information. Even though you're saying that you reported it, you don't have any proof. So always in writing, control the narrative, create a record of it, and save it. Next slide, Taylor. All right, so this is the case. I'll just touch on this briefly, but feel free to search it and read it if you'd like to. Retired foreign officer from another country, collecting a pension from that country, had foreign contacts, had obviously had a security clearance in that other country. He was a retired officer. Foreign contacts, including foreign military officers. It was, all the things that you would think would be difficult to overcome, and they can be, unless you do a really good job of building out mitigation. In this case, he had moved to the United States, relocated his family to the United States. His kids were in college in the United States. Everyone became U.S. citizens. They did a lot of different things to help build out mitigation and help the case along. We were able to demonstrate that, he had put down roots here in the United States and clearly demonstrated a preference for the United States over the country that he left. And in doing so, he obtained citizenship, as did all of his family members. And once he got his citizenship, he was applying for a security clearance to continue to work on a military project that he'd already been working on. So this particular case, he owned property in a third country, another foreign country, but it was an investment property. We were able to demonstrate that. It was speculation, potential vacation property in the future. But he had no plan to move. He lived in the United States. His family enjoyed living in the United States. They lived here for a moment, for a brief period of time while here on orders, and then went home, retired, and then moved his entire family to the United States. So in laying out all the different forms of mitigation, we were actually able to get him a security clearance and win that case. And as I said earlier, Department counsel appealed. They also appealed on the heightened risk issue. It was just a collateral issue embedded in this case. You'll see it in the brief, or in the decision if you decide to check it out. But good example of a case where building out a good record of mitigation and good representation at the hearing can result in a security clearance, even when it looks like it's impossible given the circumstances. So, all right, I know that was fast and furious, which is the goal. We don't want to waste any of your time. I know that was only maybe a 16, 17 minute webinar there, but I hope you get all the information that you're looking for. So voting in a foreign election, there's a question that just popped up about how detrimental voting in a foreign election is when it comes to trying to get U.S. citizenship. I don't know that it's detrimental at all when trying to get U.S. citizenship. It would be detrimental when trying to get a security clearance. So I dealt with a case not long ago where the individual was from Russia and had gone to school there, U.S. citizen, also a Russian citizen, dual citizen, went to school there, and then also had voted in an election there. And the question was whether he had voted in the election before or after becoming a United States citizen. And that was something that was up for debate. And we were able to argue that the government was insisting that he had voted in the election after becoming a U.S. citizen. I was able to do simple math and just show that the election that they were pointing out, he wasn't old enough to vote. So we think maybe he was there, with a family member or something like that. But I believe we won that case as well. But I think that voting in a foreign election might not have much to do with actually obtaining citizenship, but I wouldn't vote after obtaining citizenship or while waiting for your citizenship, to go through. But as far as getting a security clearance, it would be a problem for you if you vote in foreign elections while holding a U.S. citizenship and a security clearance. You could potentially get your clearance revoked. I don't see any other questions popping up. Taylor, anything? Let's see what we got here. All right, I don't see anything. Thank you all for jumping on. I appreciate it. I hope that I helped, teach you something about Guideline B and C. And stay tuned. We'll have a lot more of these webinars coming out here in the near future. You can go to our website at Tully Rinckey PLLC, and you'll see there's a new tab that's going to be up there with an individual webinar for each individual guideline. Thanks. Have a good day.